Never marry actors. But my mother belonged to the Old Bank Methodists Drama Society. My mother was not especially religious, but she went to all the churches in our town. Of course, she went to the parish church because her two sons sang in the choir, but she went to the Methodist church, she went to the Baptist church, she went to the Zion church, she also went to the Salvation Army. I can remember as an infant going with her in the afternoons, and I loved the Salvation Army, and in fact, still a supporter. But she liked to be in plays, and the company at the Old Bank Methodist Church, looking back on them now, was so avant-garde because they were all female. And also looking back with experience and hindsight, I realized that there were women in the company, because I saw them do several plays, who specialized in playing what in opera they call the trouser roles. They played the male roles because they didn't do plays written for women, they did plays with both sexes. And there were women who played these male roles. And my mother loved being in the, she had difficulty remembering lines, and she was very nervous and quite shy, but still she did this. She liked to play small roles. And I do have a vivid recollection of being 6 or 7, of going to see her in a play, and seeing her come on dressed as a butler with a tray and say, "Enter Mary with kippers." That sounds really avant-garde, doesn't it? That is Brechtian. And I knew in an instant what had happened because my mother kept her script in the wings right by her entrance. And the last thing she would do before she went on, she would look at her 1 line or 2 lines and then put the script down. Well, she'd pick the script up and clearly she'd read a stage direction. And that's what we heard her say. So it runs in the family. My grandfather, wretched rogue that he must have been, and my mother and my brother, they were all doing it, but it was part-time and for fun. Then, at the age of 12, my English teacher, who, his name is Cecil Dormond, and it gave me so much satisfaction that when 2 weeks ago I went to Buckingham Palace, and a good friend gave me a wonderful lunch afterwards to celebrate. My English teacher, Cecil Dormond, was present at that lunchtime. And this was the man who first put me in a play with adults, first put a copy of Shakespeare in my hand. It was The Merchant of Venice, and he had me read Shylock, and I started reading it to myself, and he said, "No, Stewart, out loud, this is a play, it's not a poem." And he was the first person to get me any kind of training and tuition. And he was the first person, this was a secondary modern school, I was not academic, who, one day when I was stacking the tables after lunch, said to me, "Stewart, have you ever thought of doing this as a career?" And I laughed, of course, said no, because nobody ever did, and I didn't know anybody who had. But I was taught from the age of 12 until I was 17 by a retired actress who had been Dame Peggy Ashcroft's understudy, had been ill, had ill health, couldn't act anymore, but she taught me, she taught Francis and others, and she was a profound influence on me from the point of view of discipline, that's taking the profession seriously, and she also was the person who helped me to lose my broad Yorkshire accent, because I spoke not just with an accent, I spoke dialect when I was growing up, so I had to learn not only other ways of pronouncing words, but also different words. Would you like an example? For instance, if I would go to a friend's house in the evening or weekends, I would knock on his door, and when he came to the door, I would say, "That's a leg and art." That's a leg and art. Atta, are-you, lakin, which is an old English dialect word for playing, and indeed, back in the 17th century, in the north of England, actors, i.e. players, were known as lakers. As a lake in art, are you coming out to play? So there had to be a big transformation, and Ruth Winowen helped me. She had a beautiful speaking voice. She had a Welsh background, which certainly helped. And so I led a dual life for 5 years. I had my Monday to Friday voice, which was Roy Yorkshire talking like this. And then I had my weekend voice, which was received pronunciation. And at times, I got them mixed up, and it was very
Of course, I think it was 1966 that you joined the Royal Shakespeare Company. And since then, you've played some amazing performances. Just a few that I noted down here. The Shylock, I think, with the RSC won you the Olivier.
yeah, yes.
And you were doing Prospero in The Tempest in New York. And Othello that you did in Washington that was what they call photonegative, where you were the white Othello and the black cat. That must have been fascinating. But I was thinking there's a couple of times you've played Claudius and Hamlet, and those have been captured for television. One was in 1980 with Derek Jacobi, and more recently with David Tennant, and that's the clip that we have next. Now, you had done that production on stage, and it's not, this version for television, it's not quite like, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, in the old days of making BBC Shakespeare's, where I believe there were multiple cameras and probably had a longer run at a take. It was slightly more theatrical, whereas in this one I think it was shot in a digital format with one camera. So did that mean that you were doing, it felt more like making a movie version of it because you were stopping different takes for setups?
Oh yes. For all of us, it felt that we were making a movie. We were not filming a stage production. Ironically, having said I was never in front of the camera much these last few years, I did 2 Shakespeare films in 6 months that were based on stage productions. One was the Hamlet with David Tennant, who was so extraordinary in that role. And the other was Macbeth, which has not yet aired, and in fact, I'm going to the first screening tomorrow night at BAFTA in London, and I'm excited and terrified about it. But I think, I couldn't really see very well from here, but I think there was only one cut in that. I think right at the end there was one cut. So, and I think I probably got a couple of goes at it, maybe 3 goes. But what is so extraordinary about Shakespeare, and the multitude of actors before me have discovered this and have said it, and especially with soliloquies like this, they seem to have been written for the camera, because we're inside a man's head. And the challenge, and I talked about this with some of my colleagues this week, the challenge is to take a 400-year-old language written in blank verse and make it appear comfortable, spontaneous, immediate, invented on camera. That's the big challenge of Shakespeare on film. And it's a fascinating challenge. It is assisted by the fact, I played that role for 6 months on stage, so I should have known what I was doing by then. But then all you have to do is to live inside your own imagination and head. I remember the day, not the exact day, but about the time when I realized there was a distinction between film acting and stage acting, and that where stage acting is essentially about action, film acting is about thinking. And the beautiful thing about a lens, a camera, is that it photographs thoughts. And all the best film actors I know, you just watch them think, and they don't have to do anything. Of course, the cinema is exciting also as a medium for action too, but for me it is always at its most exciting. I mean, I just pulled something out. Jack Nicholson in 5 Easy Pieces. Thinking.